Tomorrow's Daughters by Lebogang Mashile answers to the questions. The questions don't have a mark allocation, so I will give the very, very basic answer, and then if I feel that I need to say more in order to fill up perhaps maybe a higher order question or something that is worth more marks, then I will include that. So number 1 says, name one of the disciplined silent screamers that the speaker respects. And in line 10, it gives Emily Dickinson. So again, if this was worth 1 mark, that would be the straight answer, nothing more. But if they wanted you to explain or support your answer, then you can say that in lines 8 and 9, the speaker says, I respect the disciplined silent screamers who expose the holes. And immediately afterwards, she mentions Emily Dickinson. And then right up to line 21, with a little bit of a break in between, she mentions certain things about Emily Dickinson. Climbing through to a wooden shed of isolation, speaks about her sanity, speaks about the possibility that she also revered people to her own detriment, as the speaker says, speaks about the hallowed hearth, and she actually calls on Emily Dickinson to help her reach these pretty black girls. So that again would be if it was worth 2 or 3 marks. How do you know that that is the person? Is there anything you can quote to support your answer? Explain how you got to that conclusion. That would be worth those extra marks. Number 2, quote 3 separate words or phrases from the poem that give an indication of Emily Dickinson's character and life. So again, 3 separate words, or they could be phrases or a mix of both of them. Now, remember, phrases don't have a finite verb in them. So something as simple as around the corner would count as a phrase. If you said she ran, that's not a phrase, that's a complete sentence. And also it has a finite verb in it, but I'll do a separate lesson on that sometime. So 3 separate words or phrases about Emily Dickinson's character and life. So number 1, we know of her isolation. It says the wooden shed of isolation. Of your sanity, I chose that just because if I included robbed, it wouldn't be a phrase. But her sanity, her mental state was in question. I've included disciplined because it doesn't say other. It just says, quote, 3 words or phrases. So just keep in mind that in your exam and in your tests, if it says 3 other or 2 other, then you can't use what's already been mentioned. You have to look for something else. But because it doesn't say that, I've included disciplined. I've also included detriment and the revere. I think if you just had revere alone by itself, then that would definitely work. But there is the idea that the speaker, looking at herself, looks at Emily Dickinson's life and feels that there is a similarity of putting people up on a pedestal, to your own detriment, to your own injury, to your own hurt, whether that be physical, mental, emotional, psychological, etc. So that is an important point to note. Number 3, explain how the phrase disciplined silent screamers affects your understanding of the woman. So these are women that they are speaking about and describing. So if we look at discipline, it indicates structure, routine. There's a sense of self-motivation, determination. And if you are a disciplined person, you have the ability to say, all right, now I need to stop watching Netflix and move on with my studying. The discipline to make a study timetable and stick with it, to stick with what is needed to fulfill goals. So that comes with discipline. Then we also have silent screamer. So I put the two of them together because why is the screaming silent? What is being silently screamed? So yes, it's it's an adjective, but I felt the two of them needed to go together because women in Emily Dickinson's time did not have a right to vote. They didn't have much say in society. Um, I think during that time, or even much further back, a woman's testimony in a court of law was not acceptable. So women were really restricted in what they could do and say out loud, and especially in public. So Emily Dickinson wrote poetry, essays, her thoughts, her opinions. Excuse me. So she is disciplined in what she does, but there is definitely something that she is speaking out against, something that she is protesting, something that she feels is wrong or unjust, or is an injustice, and needs to take people to task. And especially because the writer of this poem is female, and she wants to reach the daughters and the pretty black girls. Again, there is this idea that women don't get much of a say. And yes, many people can talk about equality and how far countries have come, and particularly our own country here in South Africa. But again, there is still kind of this idea that women don't really say much of any value, or their opinion is not as valuable as a man's. So again, she respects Emily Dickinson because um, she, like the other women, are determined. They don't back down, and they might not be able to say it out loud, but they write about it. Maybe they speak with their friends, maybe in smaller circles, and that's why it's a silent screamer. Number 4, explain why the poet repeats the phrase pretty black girls a number of times in the poem, but changes the context in which the phrase is used each time. So again, first and foremost, repetition is for emphasis. And that's not really going to get you a mark. You need to say what it's emphasizing. So it can be a word, it can be a phrase. Now, the poet is making very clear that she is trying to reach pretty black girls. She speaks in the first part of the poem about not relaxing and lying their dreams away, about having voices that curl the straight edges of history, turning the world kinky, hair-thin slices of a movement. So there is definitely the idea that, don't be passive. Look around you, take action, be proactive. Don't just sit around and wait for something to happen. So there is this idea of growth, progression, character development, and that would lead to the second one. Wake up to see your own potential, how to look at their hearts with eyes blaring at full blast the way you did. So again, let's wake them up, and then let's get them to see what they are capable of. And then finally, with the realization of that and working with that, effecting change. And that's that last bit there, wearing crowns of change. So the promise of hope, the idea that things are now going to change because we are no longer passive, we are aware of our potential, and we are actually doing something with it. Number 5, what does the use of words such as curl and turning reflect? So curl and turning indicate change. So something once rigid and straight has now become flexible. But again, it's in context of the poem. So literally, the pretty black girls should not be relaxing their hair, not trying to make it look like somebody else's, but embracing what they've got. Um, don't relax and lie their dreams away. We spoke about this in the poem, the literal and the figurative sense. And so, figuratively, you need to impact history and society. Don't just sit back and think somebody else is going to do it. Don't sit back and think, you know, um, somebody else is already doing it. No, you can see it. You have the potential. You do something. And then lastly, number 6, do you agree with the speaker that she can use her poetry to build a bridge to the promise in their faces? Justify your response. Now, a lot of times people have a problem with a question like this, but I give my own opinion and I don't get full marks, or I gave, my own thoughts and they asked me what I thought about it, and, I didn't get any marks. Here's the thing. This is a higher order question. It's right at the end of the set of questions, which means if you couldn't identify things in the poem, if you couldn't explain things in the poem, then you are missing a large part of what informs your opinion. It means that your opinion is working with a limited amount of information. The more you can identify, the more you understand, the more you can explain, the better your reasoning will be, the more informed it will be. So yes, there is an opportunity to say no, but again, it comes down to your reasoning. So if you say yes, then you can say she herself was influenced by Emily Dickinson's poems. The idea that writing crosses time and nationality and ethnicity's borders. Emily Dickinson was, a white woman, and Lebogang Mashile is an African lady living in Africa. So you've got this vastly two different continents, different backgrounds, different time periods, and yet the poet of Tomorrow's Daughters was affected by what Emily Dickinson had to say. And that's the point. So yes, poetry can build a bridge, because if you think about the poet of this poem, she can then speak about things that are relevant for today's age. People don't ever stop having potential. So the sentiment and the message carries through. If you say no, then you can mention the fact that maybe access to poetry is limited. Maybe the vast majority of people will never be able to understand poems, with a bad literacy rate. So those are more kind of, how can I put them? They are more tangible, more socioeconomic issues, not so much, thought and feeling and sentiment, and emotional and psychological. So, very practically, some people might never be able to read and write well enough to appreciate the message in the poem. Some people might just never ever have access to it. So that is a concern. And then that would be the end of it. The essay topic is 250 to 300 words, about discussing how the speaker shows the stereotypical expectation of women and their role in the society are changing. I will do a separate video for that, because the essays are a little bit more technical and that will take a bit longer. Thank you.